Hi everyone. I think we'll get started. Thanks for coming. This is the last of this four-part series. Next week we begin another four-part series with teachers from the community. Members of the broader community are teaching four parts on the theme of redemption as a theme in Judaism. So the calendar schedule is bulletin boards and the website, and I encourage everyone to come for those presentations. That's for the next 4 weeks, and then we have a break for Pesach mostly, and then when we can finish our spring semester of Wednesday classes, we have 4 additional lectures from members of the community who are going to speak about their areas of expertise, of all of which are books they've written and projects they're involved in, and sort of sharing about their work and their passion with the community, and I am excited for that as well. But thanks for coming to this and to this series. I also wanted, just in the spirit of just sharing resources, this has been a very helpful book, Judaism and World Religions, the title of this series, by Alan Brill. He teaches Judaism at a Catholic university in New Jersey, whose name I just forgot because I was about to tell you, at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. And this is a series of essays, also Jewish Theology and World Religions, edited by Alon Goshen-Gostein, whom we'll encounter tonight, and Eugene Korn, who has spoken at the shul some months ago. So collections of essays, incredibly helpful. If this topic interests you, I would recommend following up. Actually, Alan Brill has 2 books on this topic. This is the second one. And he also has a website where which we've used as a resource in our classes before. And we're going to start with two selections from Alan Brill's website. The first 2 sources. He went to India a few years ago. He got a Fulbright, some funding to teach at an Indian university. And so he wrote a series of really fascinating blog posts about that. He even spoke at the shul. They called it Rabbi on the Ganges, about the Jewish-Hindu encounter. Anybody go to that? Excellent, good. So you don't know anything now. It was really excellent. It was terrific. No, it was very good. Fascinating stories that he told, and I get to share some of what he experienced with you as well. So let's jump in. I originally thought it would be Hinduism and also Buddhism in the same class, because I think Hinduism is enough for one class, and so I didn't get to Buddhism. I think some of the issues are similar, some are a little bit different, and if you're really came here to learn about Buddhism, I apologize right now, but maybe we'll do that a different day. So the first source is from is Alan Brill trying to help Jews understand what Hinduism is, because Hinduism is not a distinct, concrete religion as we are used to encountering in the West. It is an agglomeration of many, many diverse religious traditions over a vast geographic region that came together over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years, and only really became an ism, Hinduism, really in the context of contrast to Islam. When the sort of Islam spread in India, those who weren't Muslim could have developed an identity as Hindus, and then when the British came in, they sort of liked to have everything in categories, so there was Hinduism is a thing, and then it presented itself to the West in certain ways, and there were Hindu scholars who came to the West, and so one can speak of Hinduism, but not in a very different way than one speaks of Christianity or Islam or Judaism, in the sense. So here's imagine, let's say imagine the Hebrew Bible had occurred in India, or imagine we had responded to our history as Indians responded in their history, and recall it was last week's Haftarah, 2 weeks ago? Last week's Haftarah, Elijah and the priests of Baal, they have their big confrontation on Har Carmel, if you recall, remember the story, you've been paying attention, you're dozing off, they have a contest about whose God is real, and the priests of Baal, sacrifice their bulls, and Elijah sacrifices, and they're going to see who is going to, Elijah and the priests of Baal had a showdown of 2 competing religions of whose sacrifice will be consumed. What if both sides said, there's only one God in the universe, and we're just 2 separate cults of the same God? So let's put away differences and merge all the cults of the high god Baal into the biblical cult. Let's just, why are we fighting about this? Let's just add it all together. We already have related languages All the various Arab nations will become one religion with you. We will give some deference to Jerusalem, but we will be allowed to keep our own cultic practices, but model them more like yours. We will also combine our scripture and produce various versions. We'll affirm the biblical universalism of Malachi. My name will be great among the nations, from where the sun rises to where it sets. In every place incense and pure offerings will be brought to me, because my name will be great among the nations, says the Lord Almighty. It's all the same God, despite different cults, nations, and names. Isn't that what Malachi is saying? Everyone's going to be worshiping a little bit differently, calling different names, having different rituals, but it's all one God, so what does it really matter? What if we had said that? Not only that, we see that Moab, Ammon, all the other tribes, they all speak similar languages, all these ancient Semitic languages, they're all kind of the same. They have similar practices. We should include them also. Now, once we're speaking about linguistic commonality, we should really include the Hittites, whose language is really close to yours. Yeah, they have many gods. In fact, they have 1,000 gods, but they're good at syncretism. They're very good at mixing things up, adding things. Over time, they'll become one with us. Let's add more. Instead of, right, our approach through the Nevi'im, and later it was always to exclude and to define and to purify and to insist on this is the way we worship Hashem and there's only one God and anything, right? And really like draw those boundaries. The Indian approach was let's just add, there's only one God. There's only one God anyway. So why should we really care if they worship God a little bit differently than us? Let's just add them into to the same growing, expansive way of worship. In this hypothetical, Ezra never asked for anyone to put away foreign wives, never sought to limit practice. Rather, he saw strength in including as many different people and practices in his Jerusalem cult. Okay, skipping. So imagine that when Alexander the Great conquered Greece, Anatolia, Egypt, and Persia, he integrated all these diverse religions, cults, and languages all under Jerusalem. All sorts of polytheists, and the Greeks, the Egyptians, Babylonian, Persian worlds were now included. They came with their philosophers, their oracles, their mystery cults, civic polis cults with local deities. Some kept their sacred narratives, others merged the Bible and their stories, and others kept two sets of stories. You can always point to the priests and scribes of Jerusalem as the pure faith, but there was more complexity from Greece to Persia. Christianity, Judaism, so imagine all these. In the West, we have all of these things dividing into different religions, and Judaism maintaining a very pure identity, rejecting these outside influences. In India, the opposite took place. And so you have Hinduism as an agglomeration over 1,000 years, over a vast territory of land, a subcontinent, okay? Hundreds of millions of people. And the religion kind of grew to include all of their practices. And all their different ways of worship. But fundamentally, since, we could, had we gone that direction, we would say, well, there's only one God anyway, so what does it really matter? These are just different approaches. Okay, that's the historical path of Hinduism. So when Jews are confronting Hinduism, it's like, what do you believe in? How many, it's like a little hard. Well, who are you asking? Are you asking the elites? Are you asking the philosophers? Are you asking the sophisticateds people who can speak of their faith in a more educated way, who understand and speak of that one unity, or you're asking maybe the more simple people who are more devoted to their particular shrine, their particular cult, and maybe have a less sophisticated understanding. So who are you asking? Who defines the religion? Okay, so that's like a question this Jewish-Hindu encounter. Okay, so another way of responding, and this is also I think very clever, Alan Brill's little kind of modern Midrash responds to a famous story of Avram and Avram in the Midrash, in the Torah, Avram is chosen by God in this very important mission. God says, Lech Lecha. We don't know why Avram was chosen, right? It's sort of a big mystery of the Torah. Why was Avram, what made Avram special? And so the Midrash has to fit in what was so special about Abraham, and the Midrash tells a story of Abraham being, discovering God, and his father was I assume everyone knows the story. His father was a idol maker, he had a little idol shop, and young Abraham, puts a little bit of flour. He smashes the idols because he realizes there's only one God. And when his father comes home, he says, "Oh, I didn't do it. The idols, they started fighting because this one brought an offering for that idol, and the others got jealous and they started smashing each other, and they all got destroyed." And his father says, "What are you talking about? They can't destroy. They're just wood. The idols can't destroy." And Abraham says, you know themselves. You're false. You're an idol maker. You know it's false. Okay, everyone know that story? Okay. So here's a Hindu response. Okay. My addenda to understand Hinduism. Terach, are you a moron? These statues are used to bring the infinite divine to mind. We need a representation. We can only show true devotion to a human image. We need some focus of our worship, something to, or of course there's only one God, of course, but like these images are important. They help us focus. Avram says, but there's only one immaterial God. Terach says, yes, but we live in a sensory material world. That is why the Torah will later give us the Mishkan. Okay, we're going to read about it this week's Parsha. Okay, also God is going to give us physical mitzvot. So we also have statues. Not just you, but also Greek philosophers like Zeno. Say it again? Xenophanes. Thank you. I was going to say something wrong. Xenophanes, or the Indian poet Tagore, were against images and thought religion was mental, but you don't see them going around breaking things. Come on, Abraham, what's going on? Abraham says, but you think they're actually alive. Terach, give me a break. They're only wood and clay. Only when they're brought to the temple and consecrated in a special ceremony do they become gods. Now they're still in the workshop. And when they are consecrated, they become an access to the divine. They're not robots, or they're not moving parts. Really, Abraham, have you ever seen a golden calf move? Your straw man arguments do not work. Do the Kruvim, right? Do the cherubs move in the tabernacle? And Abraham says, yes, they do. They turn towards each other and away from each other. Terach, boy, you are really anthropomorphic. You better read the Guide to the Perplexed, or maybe Shankara's commentary on the Brahma Sutra. Avram, what about the thousands of plaster and clay little idols the Hindus make for home shrines and for stores? Aren't you worshiping those? Terach, they serve as a reminder and help focus on a specific aspect. They change them regularly. The ones they use for festivals are even thrown into the river to show that the image has no intrinsic value. The little ones they leave out in the rain under trees to show that they have no holiness after they are used. You treat many religious objects like tefillin in a more intrinsic manner. Right? We never let them touch the floor. We never throw them out. We never discard them. Always treat them with kedusha. Unlike these little porcelain gods that get discarded when they're no longer used. Avram. But she brought them food to eat. Can they eat? Terach. She said, offer it to them. Tabernacle sacrifices are also offerings. You are the one who says she thought they actually ate. You seem to treat your ritual as pure and assume that they are naive. If you visit a foreign country, try and assume that the people are on the same level of sophistication as you. Avram. But I discovered the God of heaven and earth, and everyone else was primitive. I get to correct them. I get to show my elders the right way. Terach. I cannot wait until you're out of adolescence. But if God ever says to you to offer your son on a mountain, please think about what offering means. Okay? Terach and Avram. So the Hindu response. So, when we discussed Christianity, we talked about this doctrine of shituf that's introduced by the Tosafot and refined by the Ramah and becomes like a dominant, certainly Ashkenazi way of understanding Christianity, which says it's a deficient form of monotheism, but that's good enough for Gentiles. Therefore, Christianity is a monotheistic faith. They worship the one God who created heaven and earth, but their manner of worship, is in their use of images and the doctrine of the Trinity, etc., is a deficient form of monotheism, such that Jews can't. It's not a acceptable form of religion for Jews, and so we shouldn't. And we have to have restrictions on what we can do in churches and are involved in Christian ritual. And a Jew, is obligated to give his life rather than accept baptism, etc. So there are those who want to say that really the same is really true with Hinduism, because essentially they do believe in one transcendent God, and the multiple gods that are worshipped are really avenues towards that one God. I think there's some uncertainty about the degree to which that's understood by, Amcha, like the ask somebody on the street, or if that's more of a sophisticated understanding, but that seems to be, at least, those Jews who are inclined to view Hinduism in a sympathetic way, that's the route they gave. There were Jews in India for centuries. There were Jews in Cochin who lived there for a very long time, and we don't find them writing polemics against Hinduism. We don't find them writing, questions about Avodah Zarah. It's not a religious concern for them. In fact, we find them writing about Jewish ritual using Hindu language, and we find them mimicking Hindu rituals in there. For example, the Torah is taken out, I think at least in Simchas Torah, in a similar way as Hindus take their God and put it on the thing and they march it around. And that's how the Torah is treated, or was treated in these Indian Jewish communities. And so they saw their Hindu neighbors as models for sort of living lives of piety that was not utterly different from their own. I'm going to pause here. Any questions or anything? I feel like I've sort of said a lot. Reaction so far? Questions? Ruminate while I sip my coffee?
And give a little plug to Safari.
What?
And give a little plug
Yeah,
to
right.
Safari.
Yeah. Right. Next source is an essay that Rabbi Herzl Hefter wrote. He published this essay in Tradition, in the Journal of the Orthodox Torah Journal in 2009. This was sort of the beginning of his, as far as I could tell, in terms of his publications, of his sort of really kind of exploring sort of more interesting, creative like sources. I think his career up until that point, as far as I was aware of it, was much more like kind of like Litvak, like Gemara, kind of straight. And he started reading about Rabbi Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz, who was a very so who's a Hasidic Rebbe who had a very, have people heard of the Ishbitzer, the Meir Shilach? Is that a book that it's among the more, people who don't like it say it's antinomian, people who like it say it's like, who praise it find it an incredibly radical theology, and he was certainly a very interesting person. He was sort of a collegial relationship with the Kutzker Rebbe, then they had a falling out at some point, and it was this very turbulent, tumultuous period of time in Polish Hasidut, where they kind of rebelled against the institutionalization of Hasidut. Like there had already been several generations, maybe a century or so, of the Hasidic movement, and there was several generations of Polish Hasidic leaders who were like, no, like we have to restore the original revolutionary potential of this movement, and we need to get out of that institutionalization. Anything that's institutionalized is wrong. So then they really, how do we restore authenticity, okay, in the midst of, like, once Hasidut itself becomes a institution and becomes something that is dominant in certain parts of Europe, how could it then be true to its original meaning? Okay, that was a series of Polish Hasidic leaders kind of, for a brief period of time, were grappling with these questions. The Mordechai Yosef Leiner of Ishbitz was one of them. So he writes as follows. So, and this is Rabbi Hefter's article about Ishbitz, drawing on Hinduism. The open-ended and incomplete nature of our comprehension of the divine revelation is a cornerstone of the thought of Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Ishbitz. So this is a quote from the Meir Shilach, his book on the Torah. Anochi, I am the Lord your God. The verse does not say Ani, right? It says the first word, Anochi. What does Anochi mean? Anochi means I am, but Ani is a more common way of saying I am. Why does it say Anochi? Ever wonder that? Marilyn.
It means I and nobody else.
Okay, says who?
I read that.
Okay, fine. Okay, so maybe that's the answer. He gives a different answer, okay? If it said Ani, that would imply that the Holy Blessed One revealed then the totality of his light to Israel, precluding the possibility of further delving into his words, for everything would already be revealed. I am the Lord your God. Okay, full revelation, full comprehension, nothing else has to be studied, nothing else is going to be learned. It's all there in that moment of revelation. So the added, what's added in, right? One letter. What's the letter that's added to Ani to make Anochi? Kaf. What does Kaf mean? As a Hebrew word or prefix, it means like. Okay? The letter Chaf of Anochi, however, denotes that the revelation is not complete, but rather an estimation and comparison to the light which God will reveal in the future. So how would you read Anochi? It's not I, nobody else. It's as if I am the Lord your God. I am as the Lord your God. Okay? It's a ki'ilu. Okay? It's a ki'ilu. And as if, similar to. The chaf of Anochi is the chaf of Dimayon. It's the chaf of comparison. The correct translation of the verse would be, I am as the Lord your God. Even the revelation at Sinai, the paradigm of all subsequent revelations, must be comprehended as a partial and incomplete picture of the divine as an as if. Okay, you can let that sink in for a minute. Yeah, yeah?
Well, I'm struggling because if you say Ani,
Yeah.
then it's clear cut.
Yes.
There's no other God. That's pure monotheism. Understood. There can be no other gods.
No. It's ani is not that. It's not about the number of gods. It's about self. It's about how much self-revelation there was. It's like, here I am, open book. You know everything there is to know about me. I am the Lord your God. That's it. I'm giving you full knowledge. Okay. If I introduce my right, here's who I am. Okay. That's it. As opposed to I'm like. It's sort of saying I'm hiding some aspects of myself. I'm giving you partial information. Yeah.
So aren't there a lot of things in our tradition that, we do to ensure against this kind of notion? Like, in the Shema, some people say the reason why, the ayin and the dalet are enlarged is because otherwise if it was, the ayin was an aleph, then it would be, maybe, it would be shmeh, like maybe, and then echad would be acher, the word is another. I mean, it's like, things like that.
I've never heard that as terms of the Shema, why it's written that way. That could be true. Look, I'd say they're different. There are. I would like. Let's say there's a trend in Jewish thought that emphasizes certainty and the firmness of our faith. But Mordechai Yosef line of Ishbitz is saying no. Revelation was not total, because if it were total, let's see what he says. Okay, Mordechai Yosef is rather emphatic on this point. The reason that the commandment of thou shalt not make for yourself a graven image, that's the second one, right, follows the commandment of Anochi, is because a graven image is cut according to specific dimensions, perfect, lacking nothing. This is to teach us that nothing is revealed to man completely. Who makes the graven image? Somebody who knows what God looks like. Somebody who has knowledge, total, comprehensive knowledge of God. Only somebody with knowledge of God can make an image. So God is saying, I'm like the Lord your God. I'm giving you a little bit of information about who I am and what I'm like, and that's why you cannot make an image of me, because you don't know. I'm unknowable. I'm not fully knowable to you. Even at this moment of revelation, we're standing at Sinai, this moment of greatest intimacy and greatest disclosure. I'm not disclosing everything, and you can't make an image. That's what's so bad about an image. What's so bad about an image? An image defines God. Claiming perfect clarity and complete understanding of God's revelation would be a transgression of the second commandment. This is not to say that certainty is not possible with even a partial, incomplete understanding. A partial truth is a truth nonetheless. That's maybe your point. A partial truth is a truth nonetheless. It is the insistence upon perfect and total understanding which Mordechai Yosef deems idolatrous. If I think I know all there is to know, that's what's really dangerous. I mean, that's true of like any education, right? I mean, that's like, right? If you don't know what you don't know, you think you know everything. Like that's the worst thing about bad Jewish education, is that children think they've studied something and know all there is to know about it. I had a teacher in yeshiva who told me when he taught at like a congregational, supplementary Hebrew school when he was in college. And he went in to the fourth graders when I was going to teach them about Passover. Like, oh, we learned this last year. What does the Pesach say? Right, there are more commentaries written on the Pesach Haggadah than any other book in the Jewish library. Each year, new insights are discovered and written about and published. You could devote a lifetime to understanding this masterpiece of rabbinic literature that is the Haggadah. And these, elementary school kids were taught in such a way that they thought it was a type of text that was like a simple text. I know the story already. I learned this. I know what karpas is. Done. Okay? Like, I learned this already. There's nothing else to learn. And that's the right. That's this kind of imagine like teaching somebody about God that way. Right? Like, that's it. Here's what God is. Here's how you define Him. Here's what He did. It's us in the past. Done. Okay? Ani, I am Lord your God. He told us all there is to know. Done. Okay? You can't know that. You can't have that kind of knowledge about God. And if you think you do, that's idolatrous. Okay. According to Henrik Zimmer, the static nature of idols is a major concern of Hinduism. In his Myth and Symbols in Indian Art and Civilization, Zimmer highlights what he calls the phenomenon of expanding form, a unique Hindu device for conveying motion and unfolding development in idols. In the top picture, we see, and if you look at the actual journal, you can find the pictures, you can find this online if you want, a 9th century statue of the Hindu god Indra, as portrayed by the Jaina sect. The style is massive and heavy, with no hint of delicate workmanship or movement. Jaina Art Zimmer writes, quote, is characterized by a puppet-like stiffness, barrenness, and rigidity. Like the doctrine and life experience that it renders and interprets, it is archaic, fundamentalist, inflexible, unsophisticated by any alleviating insight. Nothing ever dissolves into undifferentiated, transcendent, subtle essence. This is a wonderful illustration of what Mordechai Yosef meant by graven image. Furthermore, Zimmer's interpretation of the meaning of this image is in complete agreement with Mordechai Yosef. This image stands, or sits as the case may be, in stark contrast to the three images beneath it, which you can look, if you wish, at the article. I can send you a PDF if you want of Hefter's article. These images refer to Hindu creation myths. The sense that we get here is one of growth and erupting energy. Again, in Zimmer's words, the solid, static mass of stone, by a subtle artifice of the craftsman, has been converted into a dynamorphic multiple event. In this respect, this piece of sculpture is more like a motion picture than a painting. This reflects the notion that there is nothing static, nothing abiding, but only the flow of relentless process, with everything originating, growing, decaying, vanishing. This wholly dynamic view of life is one of the fundamental conceptions of later Hinduism. Okay, so even in their graven images, their depictions of gods, there was an evolution over the centuries in Hindu art to portray the idols in motion rather than static. And that's something that we have to, right? In our religious conceptions as well, we have to understand that our understanding of God is also static. It can't be static. Has to be moving. Has to be towards greater understanding, searching for greater knowledge, aware that we don't have full knowledge. Okay? Idolatry is not defined by whether there's the stone or not. Okay? It is defined that way halakhically, yes. But also philosophically, idolatry is not about is there an image, but what kind of image? Okay? Because even if there's no image, you can come to shul and be an idolater, right? If your conception of God is idolatrous. If you think it says, Ani Hashem Elokecha, you think you know, God told everything there is to know, that's idolatrous because it's static, it's unmoving. There's no growth, there's no discovery. This is Hinduism's breathtaking response to the critique of Mordechai Yosef. Zimmer's analysis of the expanding form exonerates Hinduism of a major pitfall of idolatry as understood by the Mei HaShiloh. Okay, yes? You puzzled looks. Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we hear about with Maimonides and God is unchanging and perfect. Like maybe you don't have knowledge of it, but certainly not emotion. Like anything where God changes, right? If you do something and makes God happy, that's a problem.
Right. So one possible answer is this is not a Maimonidean conception. We can just say that. Maybe a better understanding. Rambam is not. God is unchanging and perfect and etc. But we can't think we know God fully. I think Rambam would say that, right? I think it's an important point. In fact, actually, according to my Maimonidean conception of God, probably many of us have idolatrous, pagan understanding of God. Probably many popular theology, right? Right? If you do mitzvot, it makes God happy. Okay? If you tell your child, like if you hit your brother, God gets very disappointed in you, right? Okay? Maimonides would say you're educating your child to be a pagan, okay? Because you're telling your child that God is emotions and that what you do impacts God in some way, right? So Maimonides is probably the most severe, and that's not the only. There are other Jewish conceptions of God who's a little more empathic, but Maimonides' conception of God would condemn many of us, at least at times, to a fundamentally pagan, idolatrous conception of God. And I don't know that Rambam would disagree that if you think revelation was total and complete and there was nothing, right? I don't know, right? I think Rambam would agree that people who think they know all there is to know about God know very little. And just that sense of certainty that revelation was total, I think would be very problematic to Rambam as well. Yeah?
I'm sorry, a little bit exciting. So according to this notion that we know so little about God, can we really say or really determine some social rule of what is right and wrong? Because you don't really, some of our, let's say, social rules based on the Torah and they have this source, but you don't really know.
So here's my answer. My answer is his line, Rav Hefter's line, partial truth is still truth. So we know something. We have the Torah. The Torah tells us what to do, and we have to follow the Torah. So we have something, but we have to remember that it's not total. And so what does that mean? It means we have to constantly study more and learn more and figure out more. And that means that sometimes our understanding is going to change. Sometimes we're going to think the Torah told us one thing, and we come to realize it meant something else. Right? Avram thought God wanted him to sacrifice his son, and really he wanted him to do something, bring him up and then sacrifice the goat. Like he learned something new about God and what God wanted of him. And we discover things as we study Torah. Okay, that's so I think we have to do the best we can based on the knowledge we have, and partial truths are truths also, but we don't have everything. We have to constantly try to learn more. Yeah.
So maybe there is in the future possibility in the history that we need to re-examine our social rules.
We were constantly re-examining our social rules. Everything is we're constantly
I
re-examining.
agree, but there is let's say the red line became much more strict about some, let's say, some behaviors you had in the past and right now.
Yeah, really. That's like interesting, like sort of theory of halachic change, and that's like a whole. It's a much broader topic we can get into right now. I would say, there's circumstances that lead religious leadership and religious communities to be a little more reluctant to change. There's some circumstances that lead them to embrace change at a faster pace, and I think in theory, if you discover something new about the Torah, then you have to do something differently. And I think we can find hundreds of examples of things, pretty significantly changing, in the way we talk about Torah, and the way we talk about what God wants from us. I mean, it's just, if you go to classes about, like Kiruv classes, rabbis and educators trying to convince people to be Orthodox, the messages they're saying would be like, the selling points would have been considered the antithesis, the opposite of Judaism 200 years ago, right? Like this is a way to have, keep kosher and go to the mikveh, and this is the way to have a beautiful marriage and happiness and health and in your home. And like 200 years ago, our job is to suffer, and we shouldn't indulge the body, and like that's why we're put here on earth, is to suffer and to refine our souls, and that was how people thought for 1,000 years. Okay, so actually like the whole meaning of the religion has kind of changed pretty dramatically in the last 100 years. Right? In a way that just seems kind of we take for granted, right? So. Okay. Yeah, what?
I said that's a whole other class.
It is a whole other class, yeah. Yes. Yes, the class. Why we're supposed to be miserable? Okay, 4-part series. I don't know if people will come to that. There's a book by Alan Nadler called "The Faith of the Mitnagdim," which just takes a not particularly famous, 18th century rabbi and who sort of wrote a book against Hasidut and sort of exemplifies kind of a sort of normal, mainstream, like kind of typical Lithuanian, like rabbinic attitude. And you see him write about marriage, and you see him write about family, and write about happiness and serving God and all these things. It's a very, very grim, pretty dark vision, and that was, I think, and I think the author's contention is that was a pretty dominant, vision. So. Yes?
I just wanted to ask, I don't know enough Mashie law, but it seems like his name, the name of his book, the name of his by, has a lot to do with dynamism. And
oh, interesting, cool. Yeah. I don't know how we chose that name. I don't know. I mean, Mordechai Yosef was his initial, so maybe Mem Yud. I don't know.
It still sounds like water.
Yeah, good. That's great. That's cool. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about him. Most of what I know about him is from reading Rav Hefter's articles, but he's like one of the very popular, edgy, Hasidic rabbis. So I think people, Any other comments before we go on? Okay. All right. This is Alan Goshen Gottstein's article, "Encouraging Hinduism, Thinking about Avodah Zarah," in which it's a long quotation, and it's very beautiful. He sort of expresses what he finds Jews can learn from Hindus, okay, and what Hinduism can teach us. talk of spirituality veils what can be considered the greatest aspect of Jewish spiritual crisis, that most of Judaism is unable to talk of God or to provide a conscious relationship with Him. Different people would see Judaism's present crisis differently, while some see it in terms of identity, and others in terms of continuity. Still others conceive it in terms of either learning or practice. In the present context, I would like to argue that Judaism's deepest crisis concerns God. Judaism is a religion that centers around God, but that to a large extent has lost touch with the living God. God has not lost touch with Judaism, nor have the people of Israel lost their faith in God, but Judaism has lost, to a significant extent, the awareness of God at its center and the ability to structure the entire life of the religious community, let alone the people of Israel, around access to divine presence and its grounding in the community's life. This loss has deep historical roots and may itself be an expression of the destruction of the temple, the loss of prophecy, and the long history of exile. This loss is, to my mind, included in what Kabbalists speak of when they refer to the exile of the Shekhinah. Sound true to you? Biggest crisis facing Judaism is we don't encounter God. God awareness. True? Yes? No? No. So, maybe? Nathan?
The thing about it being like a thing from the temple seems a little... So what I'm reminded of, the direction I thought he was going, was like a Chaim Soloveitchik rapture and reconstruction kind of direction.
Oh.
And then he goes, oh, it's like from the temple destruction.
Oh, it's too much older. Yeah, no. Chaim Soloveitchik thinks of, it evokes like even like 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, actually, some people from the older generation who had a much more intimate awareness of God and felt divine judgment in Yom Kippur in a real way. You know, they weren't so religious, weren't so observant, weren't so frum, but they cried in Yom Kippur, and nobody cries in Yom Kippur. You read the article? Everyone should read the article. Everyone should read the article. You can get it for free online in like 1,000 different places. Rupture and Reconstruction, the Transformation of Contemporary Orthodoxy, by Professor Chaim Soloveitchik. Everyone should read the article, okay? So he says, right, we've lost God's presence, we replace it with God's yoke. So we're so from now because we need something to connect us when we've lost that God awareness. We sort of live in a scientific worldview. We embrace a scientific worldview. We don't stub our toe and think, oh God, why did you make me do that? Like that's not how we live, most of us, and so we replace it with the yoke of mitzvah. But God's is going much, much deeper than that. He's saying it's from the time of the Beit Mikdash. In fact, there's a story in the Talmud, which I should have included on this source sheet. A story in the Talmud that says that at the time of the Second Temple, the Chachamim, the sages, all got together and they said, what are we going to do? The Second Temple is going to have the same problem as the First Temple, meaning the people are going to worship idols and the temple is going to be destroyed. And how is this process going to be any better than the first time? You know, people know the story? So they all got together and they fasted, and an image of a lion came out of the Beit Mikdash and then vanished, and they had, in this way, through their fasting, had destroyed the Yetzer Hara, the inclination for idol worship. And from that point on, that's true. In Beit Sheni, the Second Temple, we didn't worship idols. Anybody here ever feel a desire to worship idols? No, right? Probably none of that, right? So somehow that, and even though in the First Temple period, this was like this major problem that somehow we had, and it's just gone. So they killed it. They killed the Yetzer Hara for idolatry, but where was it? It was housed in the temple. Somehow there was something. And the second Beit HaMikdash did not have all the miracles of the first Beit HaMikdash. So somehow it's like two sides of the same coin. That intimacy with God, that miraculous existence, that prophecy, all of that like intense spiritual life was connected to the desire for idol worship. And we killed one, we got rid of the other as well. The story continued. They then said, well, we're so successful, let's also destroy the evil inclination as expressed in sexuality. Like we're on a roll, let's do that too. So they captured it. And they tied it up, and for 3 days. And for 3 days, there were no chickens laid eggs in all Israel. And they said, this is a problem. We need sexuality. We need eros. And so they released it. But they named it, and that's why people, for the most part, are not sexually attracted to their blood relatives. Because the Yetzer Hara for sexuality has been was lame. It was like mutilated, and so somehow. So that's a fascinating story because it links sexuality and idolatry and spirituality and the place of the Beit HaMikdash and right and so this sort of like more genteel religious life we live, people don't want to worship idols, and people don't want to have sex with their sisters and brothers, and like God doesn't talk to us anymore, and we don't have the Beit Midrash, and the Shekhinah is in exile, and like that's all maybe wrapped up in the same kind of process, with like some positive aspects and some like less positive aspects maybe. Okay. And you want to say something, Kate?
No, it's very
Jews are both a faithful people and a people of faith, but their religious life is presently constructed so that other religious values occupy places of primary importance, often eclipsing God's centrality within the religious system. Right? When was the last time someone Jewish talked about God? People say like, "Oh, I'm gonna like turn your troubles over to God," or people say that, or some dilemma, I'm gonna pray on it. Right? Christians talk that way. Like, Jews don't really talk that way. One commonly attributes to Zoharic literature, Kabbalistic literature, the maxim that the Torah, Israel, and God are one. In one way, this could express the unity of all values within the divine beautifully. What a beautiful thing that the Zohar says. Yet the union of these values with the divine may also lead to their becoming the primary foci of religious attention and devotion at the expense of God as the ultimate point of the spiritual quest. To a large extent, this is precisely what has happened. There are Jews who are devoted to Israel, to the Jewish people, to Klal Yisrael, and there are Jews who are devoted to Torah. And Jews like us, devoted to Israel, devoted to Torah, we don't really devote ourselves to God in that same way. So the Zohar says, yeah, it's all the same thing anyway, but maybe not. Maybe we're neglecting God. The exile of God, his hiding, the difficulty in finding or accessing him, however we conceptualize it, seems to me to be the heart of the Jewish spiritual crisis. And it is only when we are able to confront the fact that we are in crisis that we may consider what the turn to Indian spirituality seeks to heal. It is not only that Jews find a spirituality in India that addresses a deep hunger in their souls. Rather, India makes available a directness of approach to God that is often lacking in Judaism. This direct approach to God may be the hallmark of India's spiritual life and why it is so attractive to Jews. When Jews conceive of the goals of the religious life, few of us think of communion or relationship with God, let alone consider it the only thing worth desiring. We seek happiness, family life, the well-being of our group, a life of values, learning, overall flourishing, all very nice. God plays a meaningful part in this package of ideals, but for very few is God actually the central focus of their quest. Here, India provides so many opportunities for an alternative testimony that it has come to represent for many that very alternative. Indeed, the goal of the spiritual life, as stated by so many spiritual teachers of the Hindu tradition, says it all. God realization. Perhaps not all know what God realization means. Perhaps very few attain it. But it is a central governing idea that informs the lives of thousands, if not millions, of spiritual seekers. Hinduism, as encountered through various teachers and religious groups, presents God at the center and a systematic path to reach knowledge and awareness of God. It's a very different life than I think most of our lives. Right? We care about, we build the Eruv, and we have Shabbos groups for our kids, and we want to make sure they learn Hebrew, and we want them to come to shul, and we raise money for Israel, and we take care of the poor, and we go to classes and lectures, and we study things and learn about the Parsha, and it's a very busy life, a sacred life, not necessarily devoted to how am I going to cultivate this awareness of God. And in India, one finds millions of people who are doing that. Okay, Farina.
As I was listening to this, I had this little epiphany. And,
Yeah.
when I'm around anyone in the Haredi community in West Riders Park,
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem comes up
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
other sentence.
Yeah.
People are constantly talking to God.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that may be something that makes that type of Judaism a lot more attractive to people. Maybe it works so much better in my community.
Interesting. So I wonder if there's a lot more, people who say Baruch Hashem a lot. And, it does reflect a certain, I don't say Baruch Hashem, so I do say a certain God willing, such as, if I'm talking about anything, I don't know, good happening, I'll say God willing, or it should happen, so I think it does cultivate a certain religious sensibility, a certain religious sensitivity. I think that's different from a really, focused, like hard effort of like I'm devoting like just the same way you would like clean your house for Pesach. Imagine that kind of energy towards cultivating awareness of God, and that, right? And that I don't think we find so much. Now there are people and he's not alone gushing. He's not suggesting that we all become Hindus. I think he's saying we can learn something from visiting and encountering and talking. And then the question is, how do we then like take that back into like, can we incorporate that into a life of Torah and mitzvot, but like have it focused on God consciousness. So some of us, like a few months ago, 6 months ago or so, there was a group of us, Shabbat afternoon, we read a few chapters of Rabbi Zinger's book, Tikkun Tefillati. This is a guy who's teaching in a religious high school in Gush Etzion, and he is basically taking meditation techniques and trying to, and he wrote a short book, which is very, from what I can tell, is very popular. It was one recent trip to Israel, I saw it being sold in the bus station. Like it's a pretty, like a mat, has caught on, and it's like short recipes, like sort of exercises and cultivating spiritual awareness. And you didn't come to that? Those, okay, right? Cool, right? Cool stuff, right? So he has, like one amazing, like really powerful exercise. He says, get with a partner and sit in a room, and one partner is going to practice being the presence, and the other is going to practice sensing that presence. Okay? So you're just going to like, you're just going to exist. You're going to sit there in that chair, and you're going to be, I exist, I am, here I am. That's you're going to think about just what it means to exist. And then my task, while you're doing that, is to like sense, like, because by doing this, I'm like training the capacity of my soul. I'm doing extra of like sensing presence. So I'm going to like sense your existence. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to think. I'm going to just spend several minutes in silence, just being aware that you exist and you're here with me in the room. I'm going to sit there in silence with you just existing and me like sensing your presence. When I've done that for 5 minutes maybe, and I'm just like aware of being in the presence of someone else, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to say, Ata. And you are going to say, Ani. Here I am. Right? And we're just going to like have that dialogue of just, I'm aware of the presence of the other, and I'm turning to you in the second person singular and saying you, right? Thou. And you're saying, here I am, right? I'm here. It is I. Okay? Very powerful, right? Okay? So, and he has like a whole book of like these types of exercises. That's like a religious life focused on cultivating an awareness of being in the presence of God, devoted towards like really, it's not saying Baruch Hashem, like, I got my kitchen's being remodeled, Baruch Hashem. It's like, it's like like working towards it and like really devoting a lot of energy towards that kind of God. And I don't think like that's.
The saying is very simplistic. I guess it's more than that. Like having taken some of those
Yeah.
classes too, there's a lot of emphasis on talking to God all the time, like everyday life.
So there are trends. Look, with Nachman of Breslov, taught that, and that's very influential for sure. There are. I don't want to say we don't have any of that. I think the piece that's like the effort, the centrality of it, and the putting real time and effort and devotion to it is a central orienting point of one's life or one's religious life. I think is maybe we don't find so much. And Chaim Soloveitchik's point, actually, even very very frum people don't have the same. He described it it's a long article. It's a very long article, great footnotes, fascinating article. The last scene he described growing up in his father's shul in Boston, where it was like an old, like an out-of-town, old-fashioned, traditional shul where people weren't so frum, and they drove on Shabbos, but they came to shul anyway on Yom Kippur, right before Nila, as the last moments of shul. Everyone was crying. Everyone was terrified because they had this innate sense that they were all being judged. They're going to live, they're going to die. And it was decided right then and there. And these people were not so frum. They were not knowledgeable at all. They didn't have, none of them had yeshiva education, but they had the palpable sense of divine judgment. And then he grows up. He goes to college, then after college he goes to Israel for a few years, and he spends Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and some of these great yeshivas in Israel with scholars and very frum people and meticulously observant, and he felt, Yom Kippur just doesn't have that passion of what I remember in my youth. And he says, because and maybe that explains the meticulous observance because it's replacing something that was lost. That's his theory. That's one of his theses in that article. Okay. In 2007, there was,
Well, so do you find any differences apply between Ashkenazim and Sephardim? Because my sense is that Sephardim are more connected with their kahuna and more spiritual.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to generalize. I would say, I'd say there's a range. There are, I think there are rationalists, there are mystics, and there are, I think. I also haven't actually gone to India. I haven't had deep conversations with Hindus or people devoted to this form of spirituality. So I don't really know how to compare. I read this like you did, So this sounds like something that we don't find in the Jewish world today, by and large, except for a few rare individuals like Rabbi Zinger in that book that I just mentioned, or if there's a guy Aryeh Ben David, also very similar, sort of heftish, that 10 years in a very Litvak yeshiva, was at Gush and taught Talmud, and then someone was we never talk about God, we never think about God, and he wrote he's started these doing these spirituality workshops, and his Shabbatons were devoted to spirituality, and wrote a very good book called The God File, where each chapter is a different philosophy of prayer. And he says, take this, it's one paragraph, Balatanya, Rosh Soloveitchik, Heschel, Samuel Hirsch, Yeshaya Leibovitz. Each it's 10 chapters. Each one is a different paragraph summarizing a philosophy of prayer. And he says, okay, this week try this. When you say the Amidah, here's how you're going to understand it for this week. And then he says, and this week also use this understanding of prayer also in your interpersonal relations. Because everything that's true vertically is true horizontally. Treat other people the way this conception of prayer wants you to have a relationship with God. So he does spirituality workshops, and the book is very, very good. It's in English. It's excellent. He did a workshop with our yeshiva the year that we were studying Hilchot Shabbat. And he had us do a whole, Hilchot Shabbat. It's a good, right? We don't put, there's a rabbinic prohibition against shehiyah and chazara. We can't, you don't put cold food from the refrigerator into the oven, and you don't leave uncooked food on your burner, even if it's already on before Shabbat, right? Because you might stoke the coals, you might adjust the flame. Okay, so there are also precautions in rabbinically in our Shabbat observance to avoid some of these issues. That's why we use a warming tray, or you put a blech on, or okay. So we spent we learned Hilchot Shabbat in yeshiva. It's basically a year of Hilchot Shabbat. These laws of heating food is a major focus of that year. And he says, fundamentally, what's it saying? It's saying you're so unaware that it's Shabbat. You're so oblivious. You're so working on autopilot, without self-awareness, without consciousness of the sacredness of the day, that you're going to turn on the flame. And so the rabbis say, no. These are all these precautions that are necessary. So we say, in my house, putting on my tie before Shabbat, look how firm I am. I have my warming tray, I have my blech, I have my hot water urn. Look how firm I am. But really, all of that is telling me is that you're not to be trusted to respect the sanctity of the day. You're going to adjust that knob because you want your dinner to be done ready. You're going to forget. You're going to be tempted by wanting that food to be cooked a little bit earlier so your guests aren't disappointed, and you're going to violate Shabbat. That's how little we trust you. That's why you have to put that warming tray. That's what the blech is for. And Chazal, the Talmud tells us there's no shvut, there's none of these rabbinic laws apply in the Beit HaMikdash. Because in the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim would remind each other, hey, it's Shabbos, we gotta and so he has to do meditations, think of times in your life, encounters, people, situations where you felt that positive reinforcement, you felt that God consciousness, and that you would remind one another, encourage one another, and you wouldn't do something so bad out of just negligence or forgetfulness or tempted by your guests. So that was a whole guided meditation, spirituality workshop built upon Hilchot Shabbat. So I guess all I'm saying is it's possible, but it's a very different way of how we typically study Torah. It's different, it's different for how we typically speak about these types of topics here. I wanted just to end with just to share, there was a declaration of mutual understanding. 2007, there was a delegation of Hindu religious leaders that came to Israel. I think there was they went back and forth. The chief rabbinate was sort of the Jewish partner, and they made a declaration, basically, their respective traditions teach faith in one supreme being who is the ultimate reality, who has created this world in its blessed diversity, and who has communicated divine ways of action for humanity, for different peoples in different times and places. Okay, so Jews and Hindus, we can all respect each other and respect that there is just one God. and we agree not to proselytize, respect each other's lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. So just two contexts for this document in 2007 and subsequent. One is there's a geopolitical context. In 2007, the state of Israel and India had become sort of important strategic partners, and that remains the case. That Israel and India are important strategig partners, and I think that's part of this context. I remember when this first happened being kind of upset by that as a Maimonidean, and I was like, what are we, we're allying ourselves with the pagans against the Muslims? Like, that's not right. What would Rambam say? I was very upset by that. I guess matured a little bit in that thinking. And the other context, though, is not just geopolitical, it's also religious. I think, it's not just Alan Goshen Gottstein who goes to India and is impressed there. There are, thousands of Israelis who travel to India on these, after the army. I think I've told the story, of the Indian, who I told you, right, who said, he said, tell me, how many Israelis are there anyway? And the Israeli says, there are about, there are 7-8 million Israelis. And the Indian said, no, I don't mean how many Israelis are there in India right now. I meant how many are there in Israel. So he assumed there were so many more, because he sees so many Israelis and, passing through wherever the parts of India, certain parts of India that are like on this apparently like Israeli pilgrimage, route or something. So there are many Israelis who are encountering something that they find inspires them, it sparks something in their travels in India. They come back to Israel, some of them trying to bring some of that spiritual practice into their lives in Israel. And I think, I guess my hope would be that those leading Jewish communities and living in rich lives with Torah and mitzvot can try to bring those people in and kind of use their passion for spirituality to reinvigorate and re-inspire our life of Torah mitzvot and Torah mitzvot and God consciousness for all of us as well. So I think we're going to pause here. It's 8:30. Thank you so much.
Thank you.